Right. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Jackie Porter, and I'm the Cabinet Member for the Built Environment and Wellbeing. And thank you very much for coming this afternoon. I really appreciate your attendance this afternoon. My remit includes the local plan. So I'd like to welcome everybody to today's event. And I know I've seen some of you on previous events before, and this one is an important part of the local consultation because it actually talks about the carbon neutrality agenda that we're trying to make sure that our local plan conforms to. This consultation is being run online and it runs until midnight, the 12th of April. And as we're running this, not quite like some of the others you might have joined it as an event with no interaction. We're trying to make sure this is a Teams event. So we're asking you if you can mute your microphone unless you wish to speak, but also to request your, if you'd like to speak, to put it into the chat. I will follow that through when we get to that point, and then we'll be able to take your comments in turn. So we're going to involve you today in several different ways. The first one is a presentation with some Slido, which is specifically on carbon neutrality. So we can hear what your views are about the carbon neutrality agenda that we've set in the local plan. The second one is we're going to have two distinguished speakers talking to us today. One is Clara Bagnall-George from Elemental Consulting, and the second is Rachel Coxcoon from the Centre for Sustainable Energy. They'll both be talking for about half an hour in total, and then they're going to show examples of good practice, which we hope will stimulate some discussion and comments and questions about that aspect. Though of course we welcome comments on any angle of carbon neutrality. We've also got here today our Cabinet Member for Carbon Neutrality, and that's Councillor Linda Murphy, who's on the line, and Mr. Fazy, who's been helping us with some of our work on zero carbon housing. So at this point, I'm going to hand over to Adrian, who's going to run the next part of the afternoon, and just to introduce the subject, and then we'll go back to some Slido during that and afterwards. And then after that, we'll be going through the questions, but you are of course welcome to add your questions into the question box at any time you wish. So I think we'll get on. Thanks very much. Mr. Fox.
Thank you, Councillor Porter. Good afternoon and welcome. It's so great to see so many people attending this event, and I know there's some former colleagues of mine, and I welcome those as well. So just moving on. So in terms of the local plan, we are currently out to consultation, as Councillor Porter said, to the 12th of April. We've developed a new local plan website that hopefully some of you have had a look at. That's www.localplan.winchester.gov.uk. We've got 9 key areas of focus for the local plan. We've tried to make the new local plan website as users friendly. So we've talked around what is the process in terms of how to produce a local plan, and more importantly, what is a local plan. So in terms of the local plan process, it's really important to point out that we're right at the start of the journey of preparing the local plan at the strategic issues and priorities consultation. We've got to analyse any comments and views that we get back as part of this consultation, and then prepare the Regulation 18 plan, which is a draft plan for comment, and consult on that, and then publish another version of the plan, which is called Regulation 19, and again seek input and kind of comments at that stage. We then need to submit the plan to the Secretary of State, who will appoint an independent examiner, and who will then appoint an independent examination of the plan, and then we move towards adoption. Broadly speaking, we're looking to adopt the plan by 2023. But like I say, the key thing is we're right at the start of this journey, and we want to make sure that carbon neutrality is very much at the heart of the new local plan. So in terms of the strategic issues and priorities consultation, we've got a vision already in the existing adopted core strategy to 2031. But obviously we know that the climate emergency has and is such a driving force that we want to embed in the new local plan. We've also had some really exciting work done by the Town Forum on their vision for Winchester itself, and we were keen to know how we can incorporate that work into our new local plan. We've got a series of objectives with obviously carbon neutrality and climate change right at the heart of the local plan. And we're keen to have feedback on our kind of objectives that we've set in the local plan as part of the consultation. As I mentioned, we've got 9 key issues in the kind of local plan itself. But today, obviously, we're focusing on the top one, which is obviously carbon neutrality. So in terms of carbon neutrality, we're all aware that the government has obviously made a commitment for net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. But obviously the City Council wants to ramp this up and obviously make sure that we become a wider carbon neutral district by 2030. It is important to recognise that the local plan is one tool, albeit a very important tool to help support the reduction in carbon emissions across the district, and hence why this is obviously a really important part of the engagement process today. Within the document, we are proposing a strategic policy on climate change and a number of local policies, and I'll come on to that in a minute in the Slido presentation. But we do feel that that's really important to obviously help the council move towards carbon neutrality. We've prepared this hopefully useful infographic that kind of captures where we are to date, what we've actually achieved. And obviously there's been a lot of great work by colleagues in the council to obviously move this agenda forward. And this captures obviously some of the key elements that have happened since we obviously declared obviously a climate emergency. But we're keen to obviously keep that momentum going and make sure that we do achieve our target, obviously a carbon neutral district by 2030. So what does the actual document that we're consulting on at the moment say about carbon neutrality? As I said, we've got a separate topic on it because we feel that it's so important, it deserves and warrants its own special topic. We want developers to think more about sustainable energy options right at the start of the design process. So right when they're thinking about the site itself, the location of houses, the position of obviously where those houses are, to think about that right at the start of the process. We've been working with our colleagues at WinAct to produce some carbon opportunity mapping areas, and we're looking at obviously whether or not there should be the possibility for carbon offsetting to support energy improvement areas. So where obviously carbon emissions are obviously need to be improved. And we'll come on to the tools later on in our presentation about what other tools are available to us. We thought, well, could there be carbon intervention areas that could target specific areas of the district that need improvements? And we could identify some key requirements for what needs to happen in these areas. We're looking at obviously introducing a local plan policy that has higher requirements than the current building regulations. And that's one of the key things that we are keen to obviously receive feedback on. Another really important issue is obviously thinking about the whole life carbon footprint of a building, from obviously its inception to obviously its build. And again, that is really important that we obviously think about that. Overheating is obviously becoming a very important issue, particularly with obviously the greater, obviously, the more kind of prevalent hot summers, and how we obviously deal with overheating in a kind of design way. So we're obviously designing and thinking about that as part of the design and development of buildings. And that is really important, not only for obviously humans, but also for wildlife. The issue of sustainable drainage systems has been around for some time, but there has been new kind of advances in that in terms of rainwater gardens alongside roads, which can obviously create an important natural habitat. And linked to that obviously is how can we increase water efficiency standards? At the moment there's a target of T100 which Southern Water are promoting, and we're keen to obviously look at that ways to improve our water efficiency, and that's water efficiency in the house and obviously grey water recycling. And the final thing that we've identified is how can we integrate the ability for people to grow their own food in larger development proposals. And that's obviously become very, very prevalent, obviously, as a result of COVID. So thinking about how we can use our open spaces as multifunctional areas to obviously not only for people to recreate, but also to grow their own food. One of the key things that often gets forgotten about in a local plan is the monitoring. And we are very keen as part of this consultation to think about the monitoring right at the start of the local plan process, because having a successful monitoring framework right at the start of the local plan process is essential. And obviously we need to track and monitor whether or not we are on progress to obviously reach net carbon neutrality by 2030. So it is really important to think about monitoring indicators right at the start of the local plan process. Alongside the consultation, we are doing a call for sites, and we've extended this call for sites particularly to ask for call for sites for renewable energy generation, because if we're going to move to obviously carbon neutrality by 2030, we need to think about all sorts of developments, including renewable energy sites. So we are keen to obviously not only hear about housing and employment sites, but also renewable energy sites, carbon offsetting sites, nitrates issue, which is a big issue in Hampshire, and green infrastructure. So what I'm going to do now is going to move to our first Slido question. So if you can obviously use your secondary device to obviously scan the QR code, or obviously go to slido.com and put in the number hashtag 72893, you'll be able to participate in the Slido questions, which are throughout this presentation. It's not compulsory, but hopefully it's a way of gaining some interaction, because obviously we can't meet you face to face. So if you've all put that code in, I shall move to the first Slido question, and it's a nice and easy one just to get you used to the Slido software. So once you've entered obviously your QR code or entered that, you can enter your response to that, and what is your level of climate concern about climate change. And we can see the kind of bar scales obviously changing as people put in their answers. So I'll leave you just for a moment to put in some answers. Okay, I'll just give you a little one more minute or so, just let people reply. Okay, right, I'm going to close this poll and we'll move on to the next one. It's really just a test is to get you used to Slido if you haven't used it before. So thank you very much. So 61% of you obviously have got very concerns about, or 62% now, concerned about climate change, and obviously the other percentages are 11%, 17% and 9%. So thank you very much for your answers on that. So we're going to move to the next Slido question now. I obviously outlined very briefly, obviously, what the strategic issues and priorities document's going to do about climate change and carbon neutrality. And we're asking you now just to have a think about how ambitious are the ideas that we've currently got in the strategic issues and priorities document about addressing carbon neutrality on a scale 1 to 10. Got a mixture of results coming in. I'll just give everybody a chance to respond to that one. Okay, that's really helpful. Thank you very much. So I'm going to close this poll. So clearly the highest percentage is 31%. And obviously we can pick this issue up in our questions and answers about what else we can actually do. And we'll come on to a question about that in a minute. Thank you very much for your answers. Okay, I'm going to close that poll now. So I'm now going to hand over to Clara, who's going to talk us over from her experience of West Oxfordshire. Clara, over to you, please.
Hello, everyone, and thanks Adrian, for inviting me to speak today. My name is Clara Bagnall-George. I'm an associate at Elementa Consulting, and we're a deep green MEP consultancy. If we go on to the next slide. But I would say that I'm going to speak kind of with two different hats today. I'm going to speak partly with my Elementa hat and partly with my LETI hat. So 4 years ago, I set up LETI, the London Energy Transformation Initiative, which is a group of volunteers who've been working towards getting the UK's building stock to zero carbon, and what that means for existing buildings and new buildings. And the work that with my LETI hat I've been doing with West Oxfordshire District Council was very much influenced by the work that I've been doing with LETI. So it's a bit of a mix in this presentation. So if you move on to the next slide, you'll see that I'm going to talk to you today about an area called Saltcross, which is an area for development in West Oxfordshire District Council. Now it's above Eynsham, if you know Oxfordshire, and it's an area that will have around 2,000 homes and 80,000 square metres of commercial space. Now, on the next slide, this shows the area action plan, and in it, this shows it in a bit of an earlier form. And the council really wanted the scheme to be progressive in terms of carbon neutrality, and so it's expressed that all new buildings to be zero carbon, no fossil fuels, to be used for space heating, hot water or cooking, and 100% of the energy consumption required by the buildings to be generated on site. So that was kind of the starting point when Elementa got engaged. And on the next slide, you'll see how we kind of developed this to mean kind of what would this actually mean for the area action plan. Elementa, we led a project which was Consortium, so it was also with Levitt Bernstein, Etude and Curry and Brown, and we did a kind of viability study showing some evidence base behind what this could mean for the site, and I'll talk to you at the end of my presentation. But so that we've got some context, in order for the buildings to achieve net zero carbon, West Oxfordshire District Council have set a fabric efficiency, so a kilowatt hours per square of space heating per metre squared per year. They've set energy efficiency targets in kilowatt hours a metre squared a year, which depend on the typology of the building, so whether it's a home, whether it's an office, whether it's a retail unit, all buildings to be fossil fuel free. And interestingly, also they've set overheating targets, so aligned with CIP-CTM 59, embodied carbon targets, and this zero operational balance. And the key thing is measurement and verification. So all of the buildings are to be monitored for the first 5 years, and their results reported back to the council. So that's kind of a snapshot of the West Oxfordshire District Council Area Action Plan. But now I'm going to talk to you about why that is, and they mirror. You'll see the LETI targets quite clearly. So I'm now going to take my Elementa hat off, put my LETI hat on, and talk to you a little bit about LETI and how we develop those targets and why we think that those targets align with net zero carbon. And it's important to say when I say net zero carbon, what I mean is buildings that meet our climate change targets at scale. Okay, so on the next slide, you'll see the LETI Climate Emergency Design Guide and Embodied Carbon Primer. If you haven't had a look at these, they are free to download from the LETI website. If you go to the next slide, you'll see some pictures of LETI. So I've explained it a bit at the beginning, but we're a voluntary group, around 1,000 active members and 3,000 on our mailing list who involved a little bit. And we work about consensus building through workshops, through discussions, through online surveys about how to, in the beginning it was about local policy in London, and then we turned the camera on ourselves and said, how do we define good? What's best practice look like? What does net zero mean in the context of the UK? And then on the next slide, you'll see our plan, our roadmap. And we really believe that all new buildings need to be zero carbon by 2030, which means that by 2025, all buildings will have to be designed to be net zero. And you can see there's a bit of a progression there. We came up with this map a couple of years ago and were suddenly quite scared because we realised by 2020 we needed to know what we were doing. So we then put in place a plan to work that through. So on the next slide, you'll see that we published 3 documents about this time last year, and they've been really very well received with industry. They've been downloaded over 40,000 times from 120 countries, and you can download them for free, www.leti.london, and they outline very clearly what net zero carbon or net zero operational carbon means. and how to meet it. We're really lucky that we've kind of achieved consensus on this topic. So this net zero operational carbon was endorsed by UKGBC, Better Buildings Partnership, REBA, SIBSI, Good Homes Alliance. So we're trying to bring everyone on board to make sure we're all singing off the same hymn sheet. If you go on to the next slide, this is some people who helped write the guidance that I launched last year. So now I'm going to move briefly to talk about net zero carbon, operational carbon. So the first thing we did was we kind of, as a group, fed into the UKGBC framework definition. If you just maybe go a couple of slides and then the next one. And then we developed this one pager. I'm going to go through it in a little bit of detail because it's really relevant. There was some conversations in the chat, what does carbon neutrality mean? So I thought I'd be a bit clearer on that. So the key thing, we'll talk about net zero operational carbon, so that's carbon emissions associated with the operations of the building, not the embodied carbon, so the heating, cooling, lighting, ventilation, the equipment. And it's actually, we've kind of been learning from abroad, and we've kind of developed over the last 4 years this real thinking that it's actually about energy consumption. You know, if everybody works within an energy budget, that's what's most important for achieving zero carbon. On the next slide, you'll see that this is very different to building regs, right? Building regs is about a percentage reduction from a notional building. So building regs, you have to be aligned with a notional building. In London, you have to be 35% better than a notional building. And it's based on a model using NCM, it's a SAP model for homes, let's say, SBEM for non-resi. And that we think is a bit confusing. Carbon factors change, makes it look like it's performing better, but actually it's just the electricity grid getting lower carbon rather than the building getting better. So we think it's a confusing metric, and actually the most useful metric is what we call an EUI, an energy use intensity, which is kilowatt hour per metre square per year. And it's really clear, you can understand how the actual building is performing when you know the EUI of that building. So how does this relate to zero carbon? If we go to the next slide, you could kind of see, right, what's zero carbon? If your operational energy balances with your on-site renewables and perhaps investment in off-site renewables, depending on the scale of your site, the scale of the buildings on the site, that could be net zero, right? What do we think? Yes, no? I think I don't agree, because yes, if you were to achieve this for your building, that building you could say is net zero carbon, but are there enough renewables available in the UK for all buildings to be net zero? That's the key thing, So on the next slide, you can see that it's important to think about how much renewables are available at a UK-wide level, and say what renewables are available for homes, let's say, and then what square meters of homes do we have, and therefore what's the energy budget per square meter of a home. So we need that balance, so not to be at a building by building level, we need to be at a UK level. Otherwise, we can't achieve net zero at scale. So hopefully that's a bit clearer. We did some analysis. In the next slide, you can see we looked at this from a top-down and bottom-up approach. The top-down approach is the renewables availability versus your floor area of buildings, and the bottom-up approach. Oh, I think we're about to sneeze. Oh dear, maybe not. Okay, the bottom-up approach is looking at actually what's feasible. What are the best 2% of homes being built today? What are they achieving? What about if you use the passive house approach, predictive PHPP modelling, which is predictive modelling to understand how the energy consumption of the what the energy consumption of the building will be. What can you get? And we did various other bits like that to understand to kind of agree on our 35 target for homes. On the, if we move on to the next slide, you can see the full net zero operational carbon definition from Letty that includes a space heating target. We know that you can only achieve the EUI of 35 if you have a space heating demand target of 15. So it's just a kind of helpful step there. It's really important that this is an in-use target, not an in the computer energy model target. Even though this is about net operational carbon, embodied carbon is super important. So we ask people to assess and reduce and verify post-construction embodied carbon, and then make sure that heating and hot water is generated is not through fossil fuels. And there's some other bits there which I won't go through, but feel free to look at if you download it from the website. I feel like I'm rapidly running out of time here. So you can see that this has been developed in collaboration with quite a lot of key organisations. So we're trying to get consensus on this issue. So moving forward, that was our key definitions, and then we develop big guidance on how you actually meet that. That's the Climate Emergency Design Guide. On the next slide, you can see it was developed by over 100 volunteers, so it's really robust. It's been really thought through, and if you go, you can see that it looks at operational carbon and embodied carbon. And there's really handy pull-out pages, so you can see on the next slide as an example of medium and large-scale housing, so they can be downloaded individually, and they say, actually, what would that mean? How would you meet those targets? What does that mean for my fabric, for my systems, for my hot water, for my embodied carbon, and things like that. Now, embodied carbon is a really key thing. We're not going to get into it here. Adrian mentioned that there are proposals for looking at considering whole life cycle carbon within the Winchester local plan, and I think it is really key. You need to think about operational carbon and embodied carbon. Letty's view is that it's important to think about them, but you have two different key performance indicators, so rather than bringing them together into one, it's saying you have an energy target and an embodied carbon target. We feel that's a bit clearer. There's not much knowledge on embodied carbon, so on the next slide you can see that we produce a whole other document on that, so do have a read of that if you're interested. And here are some key kind of snippets and useful diagrams about understanding the relationship between embodied carbon and operational carbon, and we can talk about that in details in the questions if we like. Now, the great success is that the way of thinking, these EUI indicators, EUI targets and embodied carbon targets are being implemented. It's only a year old, this kind of new approach, and I did a bit of analysis the last couple of months about people that I know that are implementing this, and over 30,000 homes at a master plan level have aims to meet the energy use intensity targets. About 20,000 of them also aim to meet the embodied carbon targets. I know of 2,500 homes at stage 2 to 4 pre-construction that are meeting or aiming to meet those targets, and about 3,500 for the embodied carbon targets, so 2,500 for the energy targets, over 1 million square metres of office space, and about 15 schools. So that's just a voluntary. People are trying to say, okay, I want to meet the climate emergency. I want to be zero carbon. What does that mean? It means meeting these targets, and people are doing it, which is really great. And I just wanted to mention on the next slide, you can see that how this aligns with global best practice. If you just skip up, so a lot of voluntary and regulatory standards have this energy use, total energy use target, this absolute target, so kind of a number rather than a percentage reduction, and a lot require data disclosure. So we're really kind of taking from the best across the world here. I'm happy to go into that in more detail later if we like. Now, how does that relate to West Oxford District Council? So you can see the EUI targets are in there, the fabric efficiency targets are in there. The zero carbon balance, West Oxford District Council is low rise, so they're going beyond that, and they're saying actually 100% of the renewable energy needs to be met on site, so that's enhanced from the Letty standard really, and we're also considering overheating. So on the next slide you can see the a bit more details of the EUI targets that they're looking to achieve in West Oxfordshire, in Saltcross, and all of this came from some reports that I did with my Elementor hat back on. So next slide, you can see that a copy of that report. We were assessing the trajectory of net zero for the Oxfordshire Cotswolds, which is the Saltcross Garden Village, and we did a bit of giving you some snippets from the report. Is available as an evidence base on their website, but we did a lot of testing using SAP and predictive modelling, looking at different scenarios. What does that mean for SAP? What does that mean for reality? What does that mean for EUI? What are the capital cost increase versus running cost decrease? And the kind of high level figures are on the next slide, which show that we looked at these 4 different levels, so building regs versus 35% reduction on site using the building regulations version of 35% on site, and then 80% on site, and then zero carbon. So it's only 5 to 7% increase in capital cost, but it saves a lot of carbon. There's a lot of running costs. 100% of energy generated on site, and because this means that you're not going to have to retrofit it to meet our target of our carbon targets, we estimated that it will save the area £80 million because you don't need to retrofit these buildings. So I think that's the end really. The next slide is just a summary of those key KPIs. You know, I know that in Winchester the ambition is there, but we haven't. You know, Winchester hasn't yet developed what that means for Winchester. So this might be an interesting starting point. I don't know. So that's my suggestion anyway. I'm happy to talk more about that in detail if you're interested. But thank you for listening.
Thank you, Clara. We're going to move over to Rachel. I've just got to ask Rachel to screen share because we just noticed that we need to update a part of her presentation. So Rachel, if I could hand her back over to you, please.
Yep. You see that?
Yes, we can do. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. Great. Thanks for that. Sorry, that was my fault for sending in a slide that had an error on it and not realising until the very last minute. So thank you very much for asking me to come and talk today. My name's Rachel Cox-Coon, as it says on the slide. I work for the Centre for Sustainable Energy, which some of you might know is a Bristol-based charitable organisation. Been around since about 1979, and we work on climate change and fuel poverty. And as with Clara, I have two hats on because I'm also an elected member in my own right and cabinet member for forward planning and climate change at Cotswold District Council. So very much ran for election on the basis that I was frustrated at what my local council was or wasn't doing on planning for the climate emergency. So I'm really always keen to see what other councils are doing and learn from best practice. And I guess what I'm here to do today is talk about a particular project that I've been working on with my CSE hat on, which in and of itself is not a planning project, but it's about really it's to try and bring home the importance of having access to good data and robust local data if you're going to guide action on the climate emergency. And there is some overlap because what I hope will come out of it a little bit is if we plan places badly, we force people to have higher footprints that they then have very little control over. So I'm going to talk really about a project that I've been leading on over about the last year, which I'm really pleased has now launched as a public, freely accessible website, which is called Impact. And it's a carbon footprinting tool that's been developed by a partnership by the Centre for Sustainable Energy and the University of Exeter, with some funding from the government through BEIS and the UK Research Councils. And this came out of, I've been doing a lot of work with town and parish councils about a year ago, and it was quite clear that a lot of them felt that they didn't have access to even basic data on their carbon footprints. And for every 10,000 parishes in England to commission that one by one to a whole load of competing methodologies that wouldn't be comparable across boundaries would have cost millions and millions of pounds. So for the extremely low cost of about £55,000, we've managed to build a website that does this for the whole country. And the University of Exeter were working on something similar. And so what we were able to do was bring our two projects together, and I think it's been to the benefit of both of them. So if you're interested, the website I'll just be talking about now is available at impact-tool.org.uk. It looks like that when you go to it. And as I said, it's freely available. Now, at the moment, that it only works for parish geography, parish and civil parishes and towns. But we're just currently fundraising to make it work at ward level as well. Although I think for Winchester, that's not really an issue because you're an entirely parished district, as far as I'm aware. So there's not a sort of dead spot anywhere in Winchester. So carbon footprinting, lots of you might have done this for yourself. You might have looked at a personal online carbon footprint tool, and you may have also seen stuff that's been done at the district level. But it's important to understand that to have action at the local level and in our villages and towns, we kind of need to be able to boil that down and have something at that in-between scale that's not household footprinting and is not kind of regional either. But to be able to use carbon footprints usefully, you have to understand the different methodologies that are used to develop them. And there's two broad churches, really. And if you don't really understand what kind of footprint you're working with, then you're not really comparing apples and apples when you're using two different types of footprinting. So our tool does both, which is really helpful. We approach it from a territorial position. So a territorial footprint effectively treats a parish as an island, and it thinks only about emissions that arise from activity within that boundary. So industrial, commercial, domestic, agricultural, road transport, diesel railways, any part of a road or a railway that might run through that parish is captured within its territorial footprint. And usually this is done, this data is not available at the parish or ward level. So what we do is take national or regional level data sets and we cut those down and sort of apportion them by head of population. A consumption footprint takes quite a different approach. And this is largely based on household or address level data and effectively aggregates that together upwards to make a village or a parish or whatever. And this, whereas the bit that's the same between both of them is household energy use, that the amounts that would come out in either footprint would be the same. But the rest of a consumption footprint is constructed quite differently, and it's really looking at how people in your locality, your parish, to some degree choose to live their life. So a lot of it will be things produced outside of your community, the food that you eat, a lot of that will be imported, the clothes that you wear, the furniture that you buy for your houses, and all that sort of thing. And rather than looking at a chunk of road, there might be a motorway passing through your parish, and saying you're responsible for all the emissions related to that section, it will instead look at the miles that you choose to drive. And some of that might be a very long distance. And here, that's a really important planning point. If we make places that force people to drive, we force them to have high footprints. So the housing locally also will have an impact on a place's carbon footprint, because how people are forced to heat their homes, what fuel sources and energy sources are available to them, has a huge impact on how high their carbon footprint will be. And as Clara just pointed out, the fabric of the building itself is a very, very important factor in influencing what energy demand you will need from a building. So the fact that we are in a position where national government is still not yet forcing us to build zero carbon houses is just leaving us with a backlog of retrofit to do. So to give you an example about why you need to understand your local area's footprint, to understand areas you can act and areas where you can have the most impact, I'm just going to illustrate this with two examples of villages taken from the Impact website. So they're both civil parishes. The first is a village that I know quite well from the Cotswolds, the district that I represent, Ampney St Mary. If any of you are familiar will know it's not far away from Cirencester. It's a typical Cotswold village, lots of stone-walled, solid wall buildings. It's not connected to the gas network largely, so most of those buildings are heated by oil or LPG. It is quite an affluent area, but lacks access to services, not really anything meaningful in the way of public transport, and there's nothing industrial happening there. It's all agricultural. And then Knowsley is my other kind of case study parish. That, as you might be again familiar with, is a village on the edge of Liverpool. Liverpool kind of bleeds into it, but it's a different local authority. It's got two quite large areas of housing. The M57 motorway runs through it for 3 miles. And although it's got quite a big area of open land, none of that is really used for agriculture because there is a safari park there. So it's quite a kind of low intensity management of the land. So they're very, very different places. And when we look at their footprints, we see quite different stories, and we start to understand why knowing a consumption and a territorial footprint and thinking about how we build places is very important. So what we have here is on the left, the donut diagram is Ampney St Mary, and on the right it's Knowsley. And the large section, kind of just under 50% of Ampney St Mary's footprint is agriculture. So that greenish colour is showing us that agriculture makes up about 46% of their footprint. Also, you can see their total footprints per household on a territorial basis are about over 30 tonnes a year, which means they're both higher than average. So two things really jump out. Firstly, Ampney St Mary has almost half of its footprint coming from agricultural production, and most of that production will be for export, and largely, knowing the Cotswolds, is probably in the hands of only 1 or 2 landowners. So that's an area where we think, what control does the community actually have over their footprint? In Knowsley's case, 76% of their territorial footprint is road transport, and that is the impact of having a motorway run through your parish. Now, the community has almost no say over how that road is used, and actually they don't use it that much because they use more local roads to access Liverpool directly, kind of going under a flyover, as it were. And they both have quite high carbon footprints by comparison to the national average of about 22-ish on this, on that kind of methodology. If we then look again at them, though, on a consumption basis, we start to sort of reveal some quite important things about the types of community that they are and what that means for the impacts they can have. So consumption-based footprinting is completely different. And the first thing that jumps out really is that, as you can see at the top left in the little bluish box under Ampney St Mary, their consumption-based footprint is again nearly 30 tonnes, much higher than the national average. But Knowsley's consumption-based footprint is only just under 12 tonnes. So it's a much smaller per household footprint. And this really is a result of affluence to some large degree, but is also a result of certain other issues. And I'm just going to drag something onto this screen, which I really hope you can see. Can you see 2 bar graphs now?
No.
No.
Hang on, let me stop and reshare then so that I can see what I'm going to show you there. Here we go. Should be able to see 2 bar graphs now.
Yes. Okay.
Great. So this is the website itself, sort of being used live. So you can compare directly 2 parishes on the screen. And what we see here is Ampney St Mary and Knowsley on the right, and they're being compared side by side now. And what we see here is that Knowsley in a way look like the bad guys. They've got the biggest carbon footprint, and we see here again this huge chunk of road transport, and here we see this huge contribution from agriculture to the Ampney St Mary footprint. But if we compare them on a consumption basis, we see something very different, which is that Ampney St Mary has a very high carbon footprint by comparison to Knowsley, and there are a few particular things that make that up that we start to think have some. When we plan places, we have a way to influence these things. So if I show the subcategories, the immediate thing that jumps out is this red section. Ampney St Mary has huge household energy use by comparison. And the bulk of that is made up of the fact that they're using oil. So if that community could get off of the oil network, then they would massively reduce their household footprint. By comparison, I mean, there's something like 4.5 times higher in their household energy use per household. Some of that is affluence, but some of that is related to the fact that their houses are very difficult to heat. And then up here we have private transport, the use of cars, nearly 3 tonnes per household for Ampney St Mary, but only just about 1 for Knowsley. And again, that represents the fact that public transport links are so much better in the Knowsley area, but also it is linked to affluence. And then here, not so much a planning link, but I have to point it out, also 3 times higher emissions from flights. And again, that's a relation to the fact that Ampney St Mary is a much more affluent area. So just sharing again to go on to my final slides. You should be able to see 2 pie charts again.
Yes, thank you.
So again, just back to that slide. So moving on, I think the key takeaway message is that not all carbon footprints in all communities are equal. We have to understand the influence that different choices that we make in life are having on our carbon footprint. And also when we do planning, we have to think about how we force people into having a high carbon footprint. Some of our carbon footprint is entirely down to choice, whether or not we choose to fly on holiday, whether or not we choose to have the heating on and leave the windows open at the same time. But if we have houses that are hard to heat, that could have been built better in the first place, we're creating a carbon burden that we never needed to in the first place. But it's also important that the work that we do locally recognises that higher income households have much, much higher footprints generally than lower income households. So the messages that we give out locally are important. So just finishing up then, we're just about to embark on a project with Winchester District Council, looking at how we can engage using impact and some other tools with all of the parishes in the district, of which from memory I think there are 48. And we're going to be working in partnership with WINAC, Winchester Action on Climate Change, which is a local environmental group I'm sure many of you know. And the idea here is that we will engage directly with every parish council over just over a year period, provide them with a report on their carbon footprint, help them interpret that, help them understand the areas where they can make a difference locally, and help them again start to think about whether or not they need, with new developments in their area, to think about how that can be a new vernacular for them and not necessarily ape the architecture or the building typologies of the past if those are no longer really fit for the future. And that's, I think, 12 minutes. Sorry, I ran over by 2 minutes. Apologies, Adrian.
Thank you,
We'll
Rachel.
Questions.
Thank you very much. Okay, if you could stop screen sharing, that's it. I'll go back to my one. Thank you. And I'll just right. Sorry, okay, can you see the Slido slide?
Yeah.
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you very much, Rachel and Clara. What we wanted to do was bring some guest speakers to this event to hopefully initiate a discussion and obviously hear from elsewhere, because we are very much keen to hear from what else is happening around the country in terms of obviously how different people are obviously approaching this really important issue. And clearly, obviously, we've heard from Clara about obviously West Oxfordshire, and more recently, obviously, the work obviously Rachel was just outlining in terms of the impact tool. So we're going to move to another Slido question now. So hopefully you've downloaded the app. And this question is, if the local plan included a strategic policy on climate change, what should be the key components? So if I could ask you to put your answers in now, please, that would be really helpful. Now, the way the word cloud works is the more people put in the same thing, the larger the letters come on your screen. So at the moment, obviously, you can see nature-based solutions, zero carbon, housing, active travel, are obviously extremely popular ones, but we've obviously got some other great ideas coming in. So we've got a nice mix of different things coming in terms of retrofitting existing houses, travel, data, renewable energy, impact on health, circular economy, overheating, sustainable locations, flooding, no fossil fuels, zero carbon housing. Obviously, at the moment, is probably one of the largest ones, including active travel, EVs, waste collection. So I'll just give you a couple more minutes to enter your answers. Some really great ideas there coming forward. Okay, that's really helpful. Right, I'm going to close that one very shortly, so just a couple more seconds. Okay, well, thank you very much for putting those answers in. There's some really helpful ideas there about what a strategic policy could cover in terms of climate change. That's clearly one we want to look at. Okay, so let's move on to the next Slido question. So what other policies could we implement over and above what the current suggestions we have in the strategic issues and priorities document for carbon neutrality? So what other policies could we include? If you recall, at the beginning part of the presentation, I put down some initial ideas for what we could do to tackle carbon neutrality. So what other policies could we include in our new local plan to obviously help us move towards carbon neutrality? So we've got some good ideas coming in here in terms of carless developments, wind power, community energy, sport, plastic waste, biodiversity net gain, ecosystem services, which I know our colleagues in the South Downs National Park have looked at, biodiversity net gain, electric scooters, safer routes to school, circular economy again featuring, community ownership, recycling, traffic-free nature parks, car sharing, compost sites, natural capita, school streets, cradle to cradle life cycle, densities, new roads, no money for the M3, green roofs, flooding. Some really great ideas coming in here. How to obviously incentivize developers to achieve carbon neutrality. Okay, I'm going to close that poll very shortly, so just last couple of seconds, please. Okay, thank you very much for all those really helpful suggestions. So I'm going to close that poll and move on. So a key part of what we've been talking about is obviously not only ensuring that we've got the correct data, but also obviously how we monitor to make sure that we're on track to achieve carbon neutrality by 2030. So each year we produce an authority monitoring report that reports on how local plan policies are being used, which ones obviously have been cited at appeal. So what we're asking for, obviously, if we want to think about monitoring right at the start of the local plan process, what monitoring indicators should be included in the local plan to assess to see whether or not we are moving towards carbon neutrality? And we're keen to hear people's ideas about what we can do to obviously monitor that. We've got some great ideas coming in here about obviously the performance gap, traffic levels, embodied carbon calculations, total emissions, lifestyle in terms of beyond government guidance, energy performance, new homes, rooftop solar data in terms of obviously how much obviously I presume is to be generated on the obviously the solar panels. Waste data is obviously featuring quite high, and renewable energy generation, using information from smart meters, carbon offsetting projects, how many we've got, and measures of emissions from new build, transport emissions by area. On a parish data, which I presume is obviously using monitoring data from something like the impact tool. Measures of embodied carbon, individual householder use, and well-being obviously is featuring very highly. Obviously that's a result of obviously COVID. Post-occupancy building assessment in terms of obviously whether or not the building obviously is achieving what it set out to achieve. At the moment, obviously waste data and performance gap is coming out as two of the highest ones. Residents' happiness, that's an interesting one and very good one in terms of obviously the current situation, in terms of obviously how people are happy with their houses, in terms of obviously not only the living conditions, but obviously I presume obviously the bills that they're receiving. Okay, I'm going to close the poll very shortly, so last couple of seconds for any other comments. Okay, thank you very much for those ideas. That's really helpful. Thank you. I'll move on now. So in terms of obviously the strategic issues and priorities document, on the new local plan website, we've got a have your say section, and we obviously are encouraging people to respond specifically obviously to the 9 topics. And obviously if you've got a keen interest in carbon neutrality, you can just respond to that topic alone. You don't have to respond to the other 8 topics. So we would really encourage you as a result of this event to obviously think about what's been said and to obviously complete the citizen-based consultation. If obviously your time is very valuable, we do have some short polls on the website that we would encourage people to complete. That's in addition, and obviously we're doing various other social media engagement in terms of Twitter polls and other social media engagement, but we would really encourage you to obviously have a look at Citizen Space and answer the specific questions that we've got in Citizen Space on carbon neutrality, but please feel free to answer the questions on the other 8 topics as well. So I'm going to now hand back to Councillor Porter, who's happy to take any questions and hopefully use our panel of speakers and our other people on the call to obviously have a really good discussion on this really important issue. Thank you, Councillor Porter.
Thank you very much, Adrian, and thank you to our 2 speakers, Clara and Rachel. Excellent presentations, and actually you could hear, you could, if you probably wouldn't have time to look at the comments online as well, but people were very complimentary about them. So thank you very much indeed. Really appreciate it, and I think it helped move the conversation on actually today. So I'm going to try and take on some of the questions, and some are also specifically for you. If they are for you, I will try and make sure that they come to you. And we've only got about, well, actually, in theory, we've got only a few minutes, but we're going to try and extend that. Can we extend that, Adrian, in view of the timing?
Yes, we can, Councillor Porter.
Brilliant, thank you. Because I think we've got a very engaged audience here, and it'd be a shame to waste them, really. So the first question really we've got is, what's the definition of carbon neutrality? And I'm going to ask Harriet to respond to that, because actually she has put an answer in, but just in case other people haven't seen that on the messaging. Harriet Rickett.
Thank you, Councillor Porter. So what we mean by carbon neutrality is net emissions, and we've got net zero carbon emissions. So for the council, we've got two targets. The first one is for the council to be net zero by 2024, and for the district to be net zero by 2030. So like I put in my comments, this will be a combination of reducing our emissions, but also we are looking at offsetting to deal with the residual emissions from carbon dioxide emissions.
Thank you. And I think that Rachel and Clara both, well, particularly Clara, talked about just keeping producing electricity so that we can balance what we're actually using. We've got to think about that. And I think that was a very interesting point. I think that's something we'd perhaps relate on from that. Danny, who has made quite a lot of comments and some really useful ones. Danny, are you there?
Yes, hi, good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Hi. Would you just like to take one of them that you're going to that you wanted to raise?
Which one?
Well, you've got lots here. You've got space heating and power in buildings.
Okay, very quick. Yeah,
yes.
okay, fine. I'll go and just say thank you to the Impact team. I thought the tool was brilliant. We're beginning to use it in the Petersfield Climate Change Action Network and across with Seeker. I think it's brilliant. My question would be, when will Impact engage with the parishes? Because there needs to be a top-down and a bottom-up approach, and we can't wait for the local plan to be produced in a sequential way. We all need to get on with things now. So, is there some idea of timelines you can give us, please?
In relation to Winchester?
Right, in relation to engaging with parishes and showing them how to use the Impact tool and asking them to understand what it's all about, and then to use it and change the way they approach things.
Right, I'm going to pass to Jo. Jo Crocker's on the phone, on the line, and she's put her hand up, and I think she wants to speak.
Hello. Yes, sorry, I'm leading on the WINAC side of that project, so I just wanted to answer that as kind of from now on, we're doing engagement with sending out a survey to all parishes in the next few days, actually. But if you want to find out more, you can email WECAN, which is WECAN, it's in the chat, at winac.org.uk, and we'd be really happy to tell you more about it. But it's very exciting.
Thank you. And a very quick supplementary, if I may.
Yes.
Generally, I don't understand why some of the speakers alluded to it, I think, and was mentioned at the beginning. We keep talking about to grave, or we don't consistently talk about cradle to cradle. And in my mind, if you're doing building, you've got to think about the end of life. Design for deconstruction. We don't want to leave future generations with another problem. And I just wonder why that's not included in the thinking, the full life cycle thinking. So it's probably a question for everybody.
Perhaps Clara might like to comment on that.
Yeah, happy to. So with my Letty hat on, it is very much included within what we're pushing in terms of the climate emergency design guide and embodied carbon primer. And we have targets for disassembly percentages. So I'm just gonna got a nice diagram on page 25, and we're saying that, you know, the targets for at the moment, or for 2020, they've designed 5 years ago. So the ones we're designing at the moment should be between, I suppose, 30 and 50% reused, and should be 50 to 80% reusable. So those targets are definitely in the Letty documents. They didn't make it into the West Oxfordshire District Council area action plan. I suppose it's like we're really pushing quite hard on that anyway, and so it wasn't seen as something that was really important to add in. But there are embodied carbon targets, and within that's to do with reducing your upfront embodied carbon, and disassembly is important. But I'd say it's probably as or more important to reduce upfront embodied carbon, because the embodied carbon we're releasing in the next 10 to 20 years means absolutely. That you're either going to make
issues. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you. Now the next question is for Clara, and then the next one after that's for Rachel. So the first one is, why do targets have to require on-site renewables when these will all require maintenance and will become obsolete as the grid becomes 100% renewable? Clara.
Well, I would say the grid's only going to become 100% renewable if we have on-site renewables. So the projection, you know, when I was talking about the top-down approach about all the renewables we have in the UK, and therefore that's our energy budget. That's including that's the community renewable scenario from the CCC, which includes rooftop solar on homes. So that on-site renewables is a definite requirement for us getting to zero carbon with a UK boundary. So I don't think they're going to become obsolete. They're very much part of the solution.
That's interesting, because actually even in our non-climate change concentrated events, actually rooftop solar has always been the preference. So that's really interesting. So Rachel, a comment that Winchester town itself is not parished. So how does it work for something as big as Winchester with about 47,000 people?
So yeah, the tool, it's very frustrating actually doing charitable work, because you have to sort of beg, borrow and steal the money to make anything work. So what I was able to do was scrape together the funding to make a tool for parishes, because that was something that bays were getting harassed about. So I was able to extract money from them to stop them getting harassed. So the next step is to make it work at ward level, which would mean it would then work in any town that isn't parished, or big cities indeed, like London, which only has one parish. And we are currently fundraising for that. So here is a plea: if you want to make it work for wards, go on the impact tool and donate some money. But we are hoping to have raised the money to do that within the next few months.
And then crowdfunder for that.
Yes, there is a link. There is a link on the website for that. But yeah, it is very frustrating, because of course parishes cover, I don't know, something like 2/3 of the country's land area. But actually the bulk of the population live in towns and cities. So actually the tool isn't that helpful for people that live in urban areas at the moment. So we definitely know that needs addressing, and it was a frustration of ours in the beginning.
Okay, but thank you, that's really useful. Jason, you've asked a question. Would you like to just come in and bring it and ask it? Or do you want me to do it for you?
Which one? I put a couple on.
It's as the chair of the EA sadly stated some time ago about planning for future. Do you want me to read it? Do you want me to read it?
Yeah, so, you can read it. Yeah.
I've got it on my phone because I can't do both at the same time. So as chair of the EA sadly stated some time ago, everyone should be planning for 4 degrees. So should we be having a resilience target or a policy? Would anybody like to respond to that? Rachel.
I completely agree, actually, that climate targets within local plans, we have to have adaptation and resilience in there as well. And the Town and Country Planning Association, who I do quite a lot of work with, have a huge amount of expertise on that. And I do think it's something that is overlooked in a lot of local plans. I think areas that aren't subject to things like flooding regularly at the moment, where it doesn't feel front and centre of their mind, are kind of avoiding that issue. And it's definitely something that I think local plans should be addressing. A kind of resilience and adaptation section to the local plan is quite crucial. And we at CSE, we have been doing local plan reviews for councils that are thinking of updating or coming up to the point where they need to update or renew their local plan. And we've sort of developed a set of policies, that have been gleaned from the best plans across the country, and they do break into those mitigation and adaptation ones. And indeed, we have a similar framework for neighbourhood plans as well.
Yes, I think it's essential, particularly as Winchester District does have quite a lot of flooding apart from anything else, and so that conversation is really useful. Thank you. I think that's something that we need to make sure we put in. The next question from Jonathan is following up on the net zero definition. Building regs for residential requires a reduction of -31%. Will the council be requiring financial contributions to the residual balance to 100% carbon reduction? My understanding is this is what the local plan and Oxford are doing, but it's unclear what the contributions might be or what they'd be used for. And certainly for our point, I'll come to you, Clara. So certainly from our point of view, I've been desperately trying to see if we can make our supplementary planning document to beef it up now rather than wait. But we've been told no, you can't, because the current local plan isn't strong enough to base that on. So, Clara, did you want to answer that question?
Well, I definitely can't answer the question because I don't know what's where at Winchester, but I would say that it's really important to know that building regs calculation methodology and percentage reduction from building regs is not, you can't think about it in the same context as zero carbon. So if you are 35% better than bad and then you offset the rest, it doesn't make you good. It doesn't make you zero carbon. SAP assessment only is regulated energy, not unregulated. And it's not it's not predictive modelling. So there's lots of flaws with thinking about zero carbon in relating to building regs assessment. Now, this is not a negative comment about Winchester and the way Winchester does things, because everyone has to do this because that's what building regs are based on, and Oxford do it and London do it, and it's not a negativity about where we are now, but how Winchester moves forward. It's my recommendation, but they may look to think about it in a different way, because that means they're actually thinking about zero carbon rather than zero regulated emissions from a computer.
That's helpful. Rachel said, how does the council expect to deal with developer pushback on viability? Absolutely key. And how are you shaping your evidence-based studies and development management pre-app materials to preempt this? Who would like to answer this one?
It was my question, so I'm asking you.
I know, that's why I'm asking the
my
team.
other councillor hat
I'm
on.
asking the team. Harriet, do you want to answer that, or Adrian?
Thanks, Councillor Porter.
Adrian's come on screen. That's a relief.
I'll answer to start with. No, I think it's a really important question, Rachel, because clearly, obviously, the local plan has got to be assessed for a whole local plan viability assessment. And that's one of the biggest issues that's on my radar, is in terms of how we meet that test, because I always say there's only so much of the pie that can obviously be chopped up and delivered. And obviously, if we're asking for obviously contributions from this, we've got to think about how that might impact on other affordable contributions, such as affordable housing or things like that. So I think it's a key issue that obviously we've got to grapple with. We haven't done it yet. And obviously, it all does come down to, as quite rightly said, in terms of the evidence base that you've got to justify that. It was quite encouraging as a result of the recent government consultation that it seems to indicate that local councils can include a higher rate than building regulations. So that was encouraging, but it was completely silent on obviously the viability issue, which is obviously the other end of the balance. So it is an issue. We need to grapple with it, and obviously, like I say, just need to be conscious that obviously we are still making sure that development is still viable in Winchester District, and also obviously compared to our neighbours, so that we're not obviously unfairly penalising people in our district. I think some councils have approached it very well and obviously included higher targets. But I think the viability work we've got to yet commission, but it is one it's on my radar to have a look at. Thank you.
Thank you. Jason's mentioned the focus on renewables for individual homes is a positive way to democratise energy. Absolutely agreed. And Charlie has asked, this is one for Rachel, how is data collected for the impact tool at parish level?
So it's two different ways depending on whether it's a territorial or a consumption-based footprint. So the consumption-based footprints were the ones that we worked on at CSE. Those are effectively constructed from household and address level databases. And that was partly why the project was really expensive, because we had to invest in the Experian Mosaic database, which, if you're familiar with it, is a sort of Orwellian database that tells you everything you need to know about everybody in the country. And so they're effectively, overall, there are 30 overall data sets in the tool, which I think between them, because they contain subsets, it's nearly 200 data sets. And we did have a lot of questions from parishes. We tested it with a group of about 250 parishes who gave up a lot of time to come to some workshops and so on. And there was a lot of questions early on about, can we collect data locally at the village and put it in the tool? Firstly, from a software engineering point of view, that's an enormous job because everyone needs an account. But also it creates all sorts of issues around the robustness of that data collection and double counting. So there's lots of communities who want to do things like, well, if we build a solar farm, will it offset, 20% of our emissions, or, what would that do? But of course, if you did that and you could enter that into the tool, then those figures ultimately get reflected in the grid electricity mix, as Clara pointed out earlier. So you would end up double counting the figures. So we've really pushed back at that in saying, it's actually highly unlikely that most parishes could collect with any level of regularity and robustness the quantity of data that would be needed to replace what's in the tool. And the best way around that, and another feature we want to build, is a kind of illustrative project section. So something that sort of allows you to go 3 2-megawatt wind turbines and 15 hectares of forestry managed in perpetuity would equal, do you know what I mean? So you can kind of see how you would match up your carbon emissions with generation capacity that you choose to build. But of course, the first step has to be emissions reduction. It's because, as Clara points out, we don't have, we can't just sort of go, well, let's carry on regardless and just build a lot of wind turbines to cover up, cover what we need. That's not how it works. There's really a methodology paper downloadable from the website that describes the data sets and exactly how the both types of footprints were constructed.
It feels to me like yours is the village version of Clara's individual version, and that description really, and in simplistic terms.
Yeah, in some ways, yes, it is. I suppose there's a gap in the middle at the moment of, what Clara's doing is very much about buildings themselves, whereas what Impact does is also about people and choices around food and around consumption of goods and about how we travel. And as I said, some of those things are forced upon us by the way our places are planned. And just to bring your attention to it, there's a fantastic project in York City Council has purchased an area called Duncan Barracks, an ex-MOD site, on which they're going to build 600 houses. And the plans for it just look absolutely extraordinary. All of the cars are pushed right to the edge, what there will be allowed. Just the most extraordinary reimagining of what a place could be. And actually what I've heard is that York City Council don't believe that this is going to something they'll have to pay through the nose for. They can bring this in at a sort of budget that would be acceptable in a kind of bog standard Bovis Homes type development.
And if it's
the same, saying if anybody hears from Bovis.
Clara's here.
And if it's the same scheme that I think it is, it meets the LETI targets. So.
Oh, fantastic. Well, we've got MOD land too, so you never know. Thank you. And Christine's actually mentioned that she's got a way of dealing with the city, so that's good news. And I'll let her deal with that particularly straight to you. I think that's the best way to do it. The next one's to help monitoring in future years. Will CSE be introducing data on yearly changes?
So some of that gets reflected anyway, because some of the data sets that we use are things that are released either annually or every other year. So as grid electricity mix changes, for example, those things will become reflected in the tool as transport data changes and so on and so forth. But again, as ever, it is down to funding. Maintaining a tool like that requires a certain number of days every year, and we have to keep begging bays. So the more people tell us it's brilliant and useful, the more money we'll be able to get out.
Thank you. We've got the advert, but definitely understand. Danny has asked, what are the plans to educate planning committee members on the climate emergency and zero carbon thinking? We will be. I think that's the straight question, just straight answer to that. I think the whole of the council is working towards this. I have to say it's generally a cross-party decision, and we're very keen to make sure. And perhaps we'll take those two presentations we've just had today slower, but definitely we need to get it in to people's understanding. So yes, I can assure you that there would be that planning committee member conversation, and actually I think it should be sooner rather than later.
And just to let you know, sorry, just to let you know, through Frame Projects, LETI delivers climate emergency training for planning committee members and design review panels. I just thought I'd share that with you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Rachel's put a blog in on carbon offsetting, how to avoid the pitfalls. So actually what we will do after this, it goes on to a recording, but we'll also send out some links to these things as well to the people that have attended today. So thank you. And then C. Westron said, agree, we need a different approach from a percentage carbon reduction targets for new build. C. Westron, do you want to comment? Gone quiet, perhaps not there. So okay, so the next statement is, hold on. I think some developers now understand the need for zero carbon and they need to be supported. How could we do this for our developers to make sure they, see Westron, hello, I'll come back to you in a moment. So the next question is, how could developers be supported so that they understand the need for zero carbon, or do you think they are supported at the moment? Anybody want to answer that? Adrian? Harriet would be a good idea, I think.
I can perhaps start, Councillor Porter.
Okay.
I think it comes back to obviously the point we just mentioned about planning committee in terms of education. I think we must obviously involve the developers, the land promoters in those discussions to obviously make sure that they understand what we're trying to achieve from a city council perspective. And I think obviously the great advantage of obviously having these meetings like this is you can invite a lot of people to them. And I think obviously that they need to come with us on the journey about obviously how we want to achieve it and the different mechanisms. Obviously we will be engaging and consulting them with them, but I think obviously there's a good opportunity as part of our kind of training development to include developers. We do have kind of regular meetings with land agents and things like that, so there is an opportunity there. So
thank you. Sorry, Ms. Westron, is it C. Westron? Yes. Hello. You've got agreed we do need a different approach on percentage carbon reduction targets for new build. Did you want to just expand on that a bit?
It was just to kind of follow on from what Clara was saying about we can't sort of keep on doing percentage reductions on percentages, kind of moving away from a meaningful target. So it'd be good to look at other approaches. So LETI is one, and there are obviously other standards out there to sort of review what the most suitable is and whether we need to sort of set perhaps some interim targets in the meantime. I think possibly for smaller developments, the LETI standards now might be a little bit of a stretch for some smaller developments and small scale sites, but to perhaps have some targets along the way to get to that end point would be good.
Yes, that's a challenge for us because most of our, or an awful lot of our sites are delivered out at less than 20 properties, and they are the ones that deliver the housing actually in most cases for us. So that's the challenge, I think, as well, to make sure it's on an operational scale. I think that Rachel, do you want us to comment on that?
Yeah, I think that's a really valid point, and I would really like to know Clara's views on it, because we often hear this just pushback. Oh, it costs twice as much to build a passive house as it does to build a normal house, or normal rubbish, which we mean rubbish house. Yes. I actually feel like there is a lot of emerging evidence that that's not necessarily the case, but often we get in too late and people have already spent money and they've already got a plan to build whatever it is, and then you're trying to make them change it. And so that it is about that making like all singing from the same hymn sheet, even with your parishes and towns, and having that level of understanding of what we mean by a zero carbon development or a zero carbon place. So the buildings within the place and everything themselves, because then you do see these examples. There was one in Scotland just a few weeks ago, and obviously with the climate, 8 social houses built to passive house standards for what were called standard delivery costs, and it is happening, but only where people are properly starting from the drawing board stage and not trying to change it halfway through. I don't know, I think Clara probably understands this a lot better than me in terms of the costs, but
hitting the targets we need, the 35 kilowatt hours per metre square, that is passive house fabric with a heat pump, that's what we're talking about. And it does cost a bit more, we're looking at 5 to 7% costs, uplifting costs. At a medium scale, at a small scale, I'm not sure of the costs, but if it's about the supply chain and it's about the contractors and it's about upskilling the local contractors in understanding that they don't need to put their premiums much higher to meet this because it is achievable, and I think.
And they'll sell. So they'll sell.
And I suppose it's like, exactly what you were saying is as long as you get the metrics right, the first important thing is to get the metric right, and then it's about getting the target to where you need it to be, but we had a bit of a change in thinking of the metric first. So yeah, I would agree with you.
I think that was a really interesting intervention you made, Westron, because actually we keep talking about percentages. It's actually finite, isn't it, that we need to be thinking about.
And you can measure it. If it's this many kilowatt hours, you can measure it in use. You can't measure a percentage reduction from an imaginary building in use.
Okay, it's good for performance gap as well, isn't it? Thinking about that. The next one about impact tool would usually become excellent if the natural capital ecosystem services were included. That would make government, national and local planners take note. It would change the conversation on actions to stroke. I'll just leave you to think about that one. But and then there's a little bit about I just missed it. Clara mentioned we used to have to get to less than 15 kilowatt hours per metre squared per year for the neutral path, but Oxford didn't have lower than 30 for any development type. Is 15 kilowatts actually achievable?
Yeah, so 15 kilowatts per metre squared space heating is the same as the passive house standard. So there's many built passive houses across the UK, across Europe, and across the world.
Okay, thank you. Paul has said, would any developers in the room to be open to discuss options over viability so that collectively zero carbon can be achieved? That's an invitation from Paul at Architecture PLB. So if anybody wants to join with Paul, then please do. Paul, did you want to comment on that?
Hi everybody. I will do. I mean, it's maybe a slightly cheeky question, but clearly nothing's going to happen without the developer body as a whole embracing this, and I just want to find a way of collectively us all getting there. I mean, I think there's quite often that some of these policies can lead to quite a combative approach, that there's a requirement for a policy, and I think we really need to turn that around and make sure that there is a joining together of developers and policymakers, so that there is some control, there's some legislation in place, but that there is a way of getting to this point where we can collectively all go away feeling that developers have made their profit, which is absolutely what they need to do to make themselves survive and to move on to the next one, reinvest. And as a community, we can also get to this position of being zero carbon and making sure that we are protecting collectively our future. I would just like to encourage that discussion with Winchester, with Clara, with everybody really, so that it's not just activists and consultants. We can all get very passionate about it. We need everybody to be on board with this. So it's really an invitation to see if anyone is able to help and join in that conversation.
Thank you very much. Danny's put lots in, and I'm going to suggest that Danny fills in the forms, because actually you've got some really constructive thoughts, and it'd be great to see them on paper into the local plan, www.localplan.winchester.gov.uk. That's my advert. And also, I really would appreciate it, Danny, that you've put lots of really useful things in. And Chris Thorpe has said, will impact also help the district and county councils with their carbon footprints rather than just parishes and wards? Yes, we're expecting it to input into our district, and then Councillor Murphy, who I'm going to ask just to say a few words in a minute, will actually expect it to go into the county council to inform the county council's footprints. So we do expect to do that. Both the county council and the city council have declared climate change emergencies and expect to be very ambitious in their plans to reduce carbon. Who should we contact about LETI training for councils? That's Emily Howbrook. Clara?
Yeah, just contact
you've said
me, yeah.
Contact you direct. So again, we'll put the details, if that's okay, ladies, into the responding email back to people. Is that okay? Yeah. So
I'll give Adrian the right email address. Yeah.
Right, brilliant, thank you. And also Bridget said we're also training staff, this is at Winchester City Council, within the council, on a carbon literacy programme by the organisation, and she's put that down. Martin has agreed that zero carbon or below is the target rather than percentage reductions, and economy of scale and skills will be universal if all houses were passive. I completely agree. And then Chris Thorpe said, this case is where we are with the new leisure centre in Winchester, the heating for which will be considerable, and none of which is low carbon sources. The solar panels are excellent for the lights, etc., but heating the space and water will be far the main driver for this installation. And I think that's one of the frustrations that we're all feeling, that we know houses are being designed now that will need retrofitting in 5 years' time. And that was the comment that you both made, actually, that we've got to think about the impact of that retrofit, and that the residents will think of, because actually we have over 53,000 houses in the district already, and we're talking about adding another 2,700 to it by 2038, because the planning permission pretty much in many cases, particularly if it's reserved matters for large MDAs, have already been agreed. And that's the absolutely frustrating part of all of this. just even last week in a public meeting, one of our developers said, "Oh, we're going to put in a car club with a diesel car," and I went, "You're what?" You know, that's so frustrating. Okay, so I think we've covered that one, but actually Martin has just finished off with a comment. Martin, do you want to finish off with your comment, because I think it's a useful one?
Yes, I think I'm there now. I mean, I just find it surprising, really, that leisure centre sounds classic to me. How on earth can a leisure centre need lots of heating? Because you've got lots of people in there, and if you've got a passive house thermal performance, and you've got warm water, and you've got people, you know, it's not going to need a whole load of heating. Or I don't understand really why we're not designing these things right from outset in a more advanced way. Yeah,
unfortunately, the planning permission was given before we were there and before all this happened. But I completely understand, and I know that Councillor Prince has been trying to do everything he can to change it as we go along. So hopefully that isn't finished. Okay, so hopefully that's not finished at all.
Well, let's hope we don't make the same mistake again. I think.
Yeah, exactly. Before I finish, I'd just like to pass over to Linda Murphy, who hopefully will give you some hope for the future. She's the one who holds our feet to the fire in every conversation. Quite rightly, Linda.
Hello, thank you, Jackie. Yes, thanks everybody for your presentations. They've been great. We are really committed to getting the district carbon neutral by 2030. I know there's some discussion on the chat and also about the leisure centre about, you know, the buildings that were started before. And in some ways, again, there's nothing we can do about that at the moment apart from retrofit them. This is why the local plan going forward is so important on the new buildings, and we need to get it right. So if you can all fill in the document and the consultation, that would be great. There's lots of things we can do. We're sort of working on with the Fabric First, we're sort of working on our council stock, and we will try and improve our council stock Fabric First to sort of try and reduce the emissions that way, and then sort of think about replacing all our gas boilers, which I know everybody's going to have to do, and that's going to be quite a challenge. But you know, as a local authority council, we've got limited resources and limited money, so we need to sort of try and use the tools that have the most effect, and that's where the council plan comes in. It's why it's so important. But I think if we all work together, then we can certainly get very close by 2030. So it is positive, and I think with all the people on this call sort of saying how important it is, you know, it really is. It shows that we're on the right direction, and you know, learning from other local authorities as well will be great. And because we don't all want to reinvent the wheel, and we'll just sort of press on and see what we can do.
Thank you very much, Linda. I'm just going to finish. I don't think we've got any more coming through, but I just wanted to finish by thanking our two speakers who were told to whiz through it at such an enormous pace, and I do apologise. And we have carried on for another half an hour because it was so interesting. We had so many comments. So thank you as well to our contributors, Rachel and Clara. Thank you very much as well to all of our visitors who have made comments and are still making comments even as we go through now. Certainly we'll be keeping a record of those, and I will be keeping a record of this as a contribution towards our local plan documents. But we still are asking all of you to try and fill in the documentation online. It's really important, even if you're not actually a resident in the district, but you feel passionately about it and you've taken part today, please do fill in online. Either just fill in the section on carbon neutrality, or preferably much more of that. I think it's really good to see such a positive approach towards this, and this has been by far the most popular of all of our events on the local plan, which is heartening in itself, I think. So thank you very much to all of you and to the officers, and I wish you the best of the rest of the day. Thank you very much indeed. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Thank
bye.
you.
Adrian, do you just want to